During the 1960s, most of our eyes were on the skies with the space race and Apollo, but there's one television show from the 1960s that turns our vision downward. It's an underwater adventure called The Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and it's probably one of the most underrated sci-fi shows of the 60s that there is. It was the first TV endeavor of the legendary action producer Irwin Allen, who would later go on to do Lost in Space and a few others. But this is the longest running one. With 4 seasons under its belt, it outlasted Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, which only lasted 3 seasons. It was broadcast on ABC from September 14th, 1964 to March 31st, 1968. It had 110 episodes, 32 were shot in black and white, and 78 were filmed in color. The show starred Richard Basehart and David Hedison. The television series is actually based on a feature film that was released a few years earlier. The first season is basically about the Cold War. It does deal a little bit with sea monsters and dinosaurs, but the primary villains were hostile foreign governments. The second season, they take a trip inside a whale, they go inside a volcano, and then they go back to the Cold War, nuclear war themed episodes. All of these adventures take place in their cool submarine called the Seaview. The third season begins with an evil disembodied brain from outer space. They also deal with a werewolf story, and they also encounter some Nazis who believe that World War II is still going on. The latter seasons end up dealing with more paranormal storylines that were becoming popular in the late 60s. Things like mummies, werewolves, talking puppets, evil leprechauns. They all ended up walking the corridors of the Seaview submarine. The Seaview actually had a sister sub called the Polydor, and it was destroyed in the second episode. Now, when you watched the series, you felt like it was looking so far into the future, but actually the first 2 seasons take place in the 1970s. And even more odd than that, the third and the fourth years jump to the 1980s. It's now 2020, and we still don't have submarines that are capable of what the Seaview could do. People often notice that the crew of the Seaview all wear Ked sneakers. They're completely white, but as the seasons go on, they kind of become a more darkened color because of the wear on them. Now, there's one filming technique that is used by the production staff and the crew when they're on the Seaview, and it's kind of considered a running joke, that the characters lurch towards the camera with movements that are visible so that the static set becomes alive. It gives the illusion that the submarine has sustained an impact. This is an old movie trick that became used a lot in the television period, including episodes of Star Trek, but none of them used it more frequently than Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And because of this, the technique is still commonly known as the Seaview rock and roll. Now, there are many female characters that actually appear in Season 1 and Season 2. You got to remember, this is the early 60s, and they wouldn't put a woman on a submarine with a group of men. So there's going to be a fairly limited amount of women in the entire series. But as the seasons went on, you saw less and less women. In Season 3, only 2 appeared in the entire run of that season. An unseen woman's voice, done by Sue England, over the intercom is heard in the episode Death Watch in 1966. And the title character in the episode The Mermaid from 1967 is Diane Weber, and she doesn't even speak in this episode. There wasn't a single actress that appeared in any episode during the entire 4th season. This was by voice or non-speaking role, there were no women there. In 1964, there was a 66-card set of black and white trading cards that was released. They sold for 5 cents a pack, and the set consisted of stills from the first season. Today, a set that is in mint condition will sell for several $100s. I remember actually collecting some of these when I was a kid. I wished I had them today. Late in the filming of the second season, Richard Basehart fell ill during the filming of the show. They were actually filming an episode called The Monster's Web, and he was actually unable to complete the episode. He was hospitalized, and he ended up missing the next 2 episodes. Now, there's some debate on exactly what was going on with him. I think it was a bleeding ulcer. During that time, there wasn't a whole lot of treatment that was available for bleeding ulcers. And I think, from what I've read, that that's what the problem was. But who knows? These studios in Hollywood cover up everything. They have code words for a variety of things that happen in Hollywood, and you never know what's the truth. They ended up having to rewrite the episode that he was in the middle of to make his character less visible. And they also used stand-ins in many of the shots with hidden faces, and the lines were dubbed in. After missing those 3 episodes, he eventually came back. Now, Richard Basehart has a commanding voice, and that's one of the things that helped him get this role. But in 1964, he would also narrate a documentary about the Kennedy assassination called 4 Days in November. He continued to do voice work and was a very sought-after voice actor until his death in 1984. He's the voice that you hear in the opening credits of Knight Rider, and he actually narrated the closing ceremonies of the 1984 Olympic Games in LA. Now, this show was really big on recycling props. Irvin Allen was notorious for doing this. The Seaview Bridge was fashioned into an underground base for the Lost in Space episode, The Lost Civilization. The flying sub actually returns in Allen's 1971 City Beneath the Sea, set way in the future. There were 8-foot-long models that were used for the Seaview, and they chopped them up in all sorts of different ways. They were used in 1966 in the movie Batman, and it even turned up in episodes of Wonder Woman. But the sad thing about this is most of them have been all cut up and reused and repurposed for different things, so that none of the original ones survive today. Now let's talk about the big fight that happened on this set. The actual fight was between Harlan Ellison, who was a writer for one of the episodes, and an ABC censor. Harlan Ellison is a famous sci-fi writer, but he's got a volatile temper, and he's just known for coming unglued on people. The censor started editing things that he was writing, and he just came unglued on him. He climbed across the table and punched the guy. When he punched him, he fell backwards and fell down and hit a wall. On this wall, there was one of the 6-foot-long Seaview models that had been used in the series, and it was displayed prominently by being mounted on this wall. When the gentleman hit the wall, the submarine fell on him and completely broke his pelvis. Harlan Ellison was notorious for actions like this. He couldn't stand it when the censors changed his work. He would often change his name. He would list the name of Cordwainer Bird in the credits if anything he wrote had been tampered with by the censors. This guy was a talented writer, but he was pretty much unhinged and kind of a nutcase sometimes. ABC started to really try to shift the plots because they were trying to have more control on the series and make it have a lighter tone. In March of 1968, it was announced that Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea would not be back for a 5th season. This was a popular show, and people were sad to see it go. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.